On a Monday afternoon in July of 1981, a mother in South Florida left her 6-year-old son alone at a video game display. She was 2 aisles away. She told him she'd be back in a few minutes. When she came back, the game was still running. The boy was not. 16 days later, fishermen found what was left of him floating in a drainage canal, 100 miles from where he vanished. That gap, however many minutes it actually was, didn't just end a 6-year-old's life. It rewrote how an entire country searches for missing children. It's the reason for the emergency alert on your phone. It's the reason for the lockdowns at Walmart. It's the reason your parents never let you out of their sight. You probably know the name Adam Walsh. But what happened in that 100-mile gap is still tearing courtrooms apart 4 decades later, because the official story everyone believes is wrong. The day started with a newspaper ad. John Walsh saw it that morning. Brass barrel lamps, on sale at a Sears in Hollywood, Florida. He called his wife, Reve. Worth a look. She dressed 6-year-old Adam in his favorite boat captain's hat and made the short drive. Inside the store, right at the entrance to the toy department, Adam spotted a demo unit running a new game, Asteroids. He begged to play it. Reve hesitated. Home Furnishings was only a couple of aisles over. She told him where to find her, kissed him, walked away to look at lamps. The lamps weren't in stock. A clerk checked the back, came back empty-handed. Reve left her name in case they came in later. By the time she rounded the corner back to the video display, the game was still running. Cannon fire, spaceship sounds, looping to nobody. Adam wasn't there. She called his nickname up and down the aisles. Cooter. Cooter, where are you? She found a security guard, 17 years old, a girl named Kathy Schaefer, and pulled out Adam's school photo. Schaefer studied it, said she wasn't sure. They paged him over the PA. Every 15 minutes, for the next hour. He never came. Here's what Schaefer didn't say that day, and wouldn't say for 25 years. Less than an hour earlier, she'd caught Adam in a shoving match with 3 other boys over that same video game, and ordered all of them out of the store, Adam included, without asking a single one where their parents were. When a terrified mother held up his photo and asked if she'd seen him, Kathy Schaefer lied. She told Detective Joe Matthews, decades later, "Not a day has gone by in 25 years that I haven't thought about it." By 1:55 p.m., 2 hours after Adam vanished, Reve called the police. By 3 o'clock, John Walsh was running through the parking lot toward a cluster of cruisers, lights turning. When the store finally closed for the night, John and Reve made up a bed in the back seat of the family car. Adam's blanket folded into a pillow, and left the doors unlocked, with a note taped to the dashboard. "Adam, stay in the car. Mommy and Daddy are looking for you." He never came back to read it. Then they drove home, and rest was impossible. Reve got on her bicycle and rode the neighborhood, calling Adam's name, then circled back to the shuttered Sears, climbed the fire stairs to the roof, and called down the ventilation shafts. John joined a human chain sweeping the nearby golf course, while a police helicopter combed the streets with a spotlight. The day Adam vanished, Hollywood police told a reporter, on the record, "Kidnapping is not suspected." There was no ransom note, no custody dispute, nothing that fit the shape of a crime anyone knew how to file. In 1981, there was no Amber Alert. Florida Senator Paula Hawkins tried to get the FBI involved in the search, and hit a wall. A stolen car could get the FBI moving inside a day. A missing 6-year-old could not. For 2 weeks, there was nothing. Then, on August 10th, a fisherman near Vero Beach, 100 miles north of the Sears where Adam disappeared, found a child's severed head floating in a drainage canal. The medical examiner catalogued clean-cut wounds, consistent with a heavy blade. One detail would matter for the next 4 decades. The upper right incisor was missing, a new adult tooth just erupting through the gum behind it. Every other tooth was intact, except for a filling in the last lower left molar. Adam's dentist had x-rays showing that exact filling in that exact tooth. That morning, John Walsh was in New York, asleep in a hotel room, booked to appear on Good Morning America. A police contact called before dawn. Remains had been found. Probably not Adam's, they said, "Don't worry." The network called next, offering to cancel the appearance. Walsh didn't cancel. In his own words, later, "I still have to give it a shot for all the other kids." Within 2 months, the Walshes were on Capitol Hill, pushing what became the Missing Children Act. But the case itself sat frozen. No suspect. No arrest. 2 full years without a single lead. Then, in the fall of 1983, a man already in a Jacksonville jail cell, locked up for arson, a drifter named Otis Toole, was being interviewed by a homicide detective from Brevard County about a case that had nothing to do with Adam Walsh. Mid-interview, Toole suddenly asked the detective if he was from Fort Lauderdale. He wasn't. But something had shifted, and the detective sat back down. Toole described finding a boy at a Sears store, luring him with candy, driving him north. He described killing him, cutting off his head. The detective had never worked the Adam Walsh case. He called Hollywood PD immediately. It took them about a week to call back. His name was Jimmy Campbell, a college student who'd lived in the Walsh's spare room for 4 years, close enough to family to coach Adam's t-ball team, go to the beach, be part of the daily routine, without sharing the last name. 2 weeks in, the case had no leads. Polygraph examiner Joe Matthews came in to test everyone connected to the family. He cleared John Walsh outright. Then, almost as an afterthought, Walsh mentioned Jimmy, out there helping with the search. Matthews called him in that same night. Campbell didn't confess to a kidnapping. He confessed to a brief affair with Reve Walsh, months before Adam went missing, while John was away. Matthews ran him on the machine anyway. Every question about Adam came back clean. That should have ended it. Instead, it turned into a chase. Lead detective Jack Hoffman heard affair and stopped listening. Motive, he decided. Walsh finds out, throws him out. Campbell steals the kid for revenge. Hoffman demanded a second polygraph. Matthews warned him it was pointless. Hoffman scheduled it anyway, then didn't wait for it. He and his partner pulled Campbell into an unrecorded interrogation hours before the test, screaming accusations at a 20-something kid who had nothing to do with it. Campbell had an alibi that held. Co-workers placed him on the water all afternoon, prepping sailboats for a commercial shoot. His second polygraph came back exactly like the first. Clean. It didn't matter. While that second test was still running, word reached the precinct that a child's head had been found 100 miles north. An assistant chief burst into the exam room and told Matthews, flatly, "We know he did it. Get a confession." Matthews finished the test anyway. Still clean. He told the room, over the chief's objections, "I'm nobody's whore. I call it the way I see it." Here's the part that took 27 years to surface. Hoffman falsified his own paperwork. He filed a report claiming he'd identified Campbell through his own detective work, dating it a full day before he'd ever heard the name from Matthews. He wrote that the polygraph came back inconclusive. It hadn't. It had cleared Campbell twice. Hollywood PD never told the Walshes. John Walsh didn't learn his old friend had been exonerated until decades later, in casual conversation with Matthews. Reve spent all those years believing the man suspected of stealing her son was doing it to punish her for an affair, carrying that alone, in silence. One family friend, cleared twice, nearly railroaded by a detective who fabricated his own files to chase a theory he liked better than the truth, and the Walshes carrying it, unknowing, for a generation. The night before Adam disappeared, a 12-year-old girl named Heidi Meyer was shopping with her mother at a Kmart less than 2 miles from that same Sears. Her mother told her to wait by the toy aisle. A man in his 30s, unshaven, one eye wandering, reeking, cornered her alone and asked if she wanted a ride in the shopping cart. Heidi screamed. It was gone before security arrived. Nobody connected it to anything. Nothing had happened yet. That man was Otis Toole. 26 months later, Toole was sitting in a Jacksonville jail cell for an unrelated arson, talking to a Brevard County detective named Steve Kendrick about a homicide 2.5 hours south, a case Toole had nothing to do with. Kendrick was already packing up to leave, tape recorder off, when Toole straightened and asked if he was from Fort Lauderdale. He wasn't. But something in Toole's face had changed. Kendrick sat back down. What followed wasn't polished. Toole said he'd found a boy outside a Sears, told him he had candy, gotten him into a Cadillac, said he'd meant to raise the boy as his own son back in Jacksonville, and that the plan fell apart when the boy wouldn't stop crying for his mother, so he hit him again. Drove the child, unconscious, to a stretch of Turnpike Service Road. Killed him there. He described cutting off the head, throwing it into standing water beside the road. Kendrick passed the confession up his own chain, to Hollywood PD. Nobody moved with urgency. It took a week for anyone to call back. A week after that, a different detective, working a completely separate case out of Louisiana, sat down to eat lunch with Toole and asked whether the rumors about a kid in South Florida were true. Toole put down his food, pulled his knees to his chest, started to cry. He thought the detective already knew. He confessed again: the highway, the backhand across the face, the child going still in the seat, the machete, the fork in the dirt road. Then, days later, he recanted. This was Toole's pattern for the rest of his life. Confess, recant, confess again with a new detail bolted on. Recant again. He claimed dozens of killings across the country, sometimes alongside his companion Henry Lee Lucas, and a large share of those claims fell apart under scrutiny. It's the single biggest reason the case against him never felt settled to anyone watching from outside. But some of what surrounded Toole didn't come from Toole's own mouth. Investigators pulled a section of carpet from the Cadillac he'd owned that summer and ran it under luminol, light that reveals blood invisible to the naked eye. What resolved out of the floorboard fibers was the unmistakable outline of a small child's face. Separately, Bill Mistler, a pest control company owner waiting on a parking spot outside that Sears the exact afternoon Adam vanished, had watched an odd-looking man in a dented Cadillac walk up to a neatly dressed little boy at the curb, crouch down, and lead him by the arm into the passenger side. Mistler didn't think much of it at the time. Years later, watching Toole's face fill his television screen, he realized what he'd seen, and came forward. An 8-year-old boy standing at the same video display as Adam that day independently described a man matching Toole leading his playmate away. Toole also wrote to John Walsh directly, an extortion letter, demanding money in exchange for the location of Adam's remains. Walsh handed it straight to Hollywood PD. The detective running the case filed it away, convinced Toole was chasing attention, not confessing to anything real. By now, the case against Toole from the outside looked stacked. Then, in 1996, dying of cirrhosis in a prison hospital bed, no detective in the room, nothing left to gain or lose, Toole told a prison chaplain he was sorry for the boy he'd killed in Broward County. Not a police confession, not a bargaining chip, just a dying man clearing something off his chest to God. Here's the problem, and it's the reason this theory never fully closes even with all of that stacked up. Almost everything that could have settled it forensically didn't survive to be tested properly. The carpet sample went into an evidence room in 1984 and was gone by the time anyone came looking for it again. The Cadillac itself was auctioned, resold, and scrapped years before better testing existed. The machete tested positive for trace blood in 1983, and by 1995, when DNA science had caught up enough to identify whose blood it was, that same blood could no longer be found on the blade at all. Toole was never charged. He died in prison in 1996 for an unrelated murder, technically still innocent, in the eyes of the law, of the one crime the entire country had already convicted him of in its head. By the summer of 1992, the case was completely cold. Then a name exploded across every television in America: Jeffrey Dahmer, arrested in Milwaukee, 17 murders. Somewhere in the timeline, someone noticed a detail that made the room go quiet. When Dahmer was discharged from the army in 1981, he spent time in Miami Beach. Same year. Roughly the same part of Florida. At John Walsh's request, Jack Hoffman, the same detective who'd spent a decade fixated on Jimmy Campbell, flew to Wisconsin to interview Dahmer in prison. Dahmer told him, plainly, that he had nothing to do with Adam Walsh. Nobody ran a polygraph. Hoffman flew home. For the next 2 years, that single interview was the only thing connecting Dahmer to South Florida. The theory should have died there. It didn't. Nearly 2 decades later, new witnesses started coming forward, claiming they remembered seeing a disheveled man near that Sears the day Adam disappeared. Years later, watching the news, they decided it looked like Dahmer. By 2010, the Miami Herald ran it on the front page. The old rumor resurrected as breaking news. Florida's chief assistant state attorney had a blunt response. Eyewitness identifications made decades after a crime are among the least reliable forms of evidence that exist. And when investigators sat the old witness descriptions side by side with photographs, the memories looked far more like the unkempt, disheveled Otis Toole than the clean-cut Dahmer. No prosecutor ever came close to filing charges. The state attorney's private read on the resurgence was blunter still. It made a fine premise for a paperback mystery, and nothing more. By 1984, less than 3 years after that afternoon at Sears, the machinery Adam's disappearance had exposed started to change. First, the Missing Children Act. Then the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Then Code Adam, the page you've heard in 100 Walmarts and Home Depots without knowing where the name came from. But the biggest thing Adam Walsh changed isn't a law, it's a habit. Ask anyone who was a parent in the 1970s what shopping with a kid used to look like, and you'll hear some version of the same story. You'd hit the toy aisle, tell them to stay put, and go find what you needed 2 aisles over. The whole rooms of children raised themselves inside department stores for 10 minutes at a stretch, and nobody thought twice. After July 27, 1981, that stopped. Not gradually, almost overnight. Parents who'd grown up as latchkey kids themselves started keeping a hand on their kid's shoulder in the cereal aisle. Milk cartons started printing faces. A generation of 6- and 7-year-olds got sat down and told, in language blunt enough to stick, that there were people in the world who would hurt them, and that the rule now was, don't leave my side, not even for a second. Adam Walsh became the reason an entire country of parents stopped trusting the world to look after their kids. John Walsh channeled his grief into television, launching America's Most Wanted. He became the man who helped capture hundreds of the country's most dangerous fugitives. But none of that changed one fact. For 27 years, nobody was arrested for killing his own son. Then, in November 2008, Detective Joe Matthews, retired, still working the case on his own time, laid it all out for the new Hollywood police chief. Tools 25 separate confessions, 2 eyewitnesses, an extortion letter, and a luminol scan of the Cadillac's carpet that had sat in an evidence file for 2 decades, the outline of a small boy's face, burned into the fibers in his own blood. On December 16, 2008, Chief Chad Wagner stood in front of a room full of cameras and said the words the Walshes had waited 27 years to hear. The case was closed. Otis Toole did it. This could have been closed years ago, he said. Everything they'd used to close it had been sitting in the file the entire time. Reve Walsh's response wasn't triumphant. It was quiet. This will be our first real Christmas in 27 years, she said. John Walsh's was sharper. It's not about closure, he told reporters, it's about justice. But even that isn't where this ends. Toole was already dead. There was no trial, no verdict, no cross-examination. Just a chief's announcement that a dead man would have been convicted, if only he'd lived long enough to stand trial. Within weeks, a Washington profiler was calling the closure premature in print. The detective who'd interrogated Toole longest went on record insisting he was innocent. And more than a year later, the Dahmer rumor ran on a front page again, like it had never been settled at all. Adam Walsh has a national alert system, a federal law with his name on it, and a store-wide page that's brought millions of missing kids home safely. What he doesn't have, what nobody can give him, is a courtroom that ever said guilty out loud. The Adam Walsh case was paralyzed for a generation by police ego and lost evidence. If you value documentaries that expose exactly how these systems fail, hit subscribe. But your next investigation is already on the screen. If you thought Detective Hoffman fabricating a police report was a disaster, you need to see what happens when a precinct doesn't just lose the evidence. They hand it directly back to the killer. Click the video on your screen right now to see exactly how they let it happen. I'll see you there.